What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to take a look at what the fixture schedule is going to look like for the rest of the season in terms of blank and double game weeks, and then also how our chips fit into that, where you might want to use them and all that good stuff. So if you do enjoy the video and find it useful, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, let's get straight into it. So let's start with double game week 24 or double game week 25. One of these 2 weeks is very likely to be where the Everton versus Liverpool fixture is rearranged that was postponed back in game week 15. We're unlikely to get it confirmed before game week 23. Essentially, they're waiting to see if Liverpool finish in the top 8 of the Champions League, because if they do, there's no playoff games, and therefore the midweeks for game weeks 24 and 25 will be free. Then they can rearrange the Everton game. We all know by looking at the Champions League table that Liverpool will finish top 8, but they need confirmation before they can plan anything. If the double goes in 24, Liverpool will have Bournemouth away and Everton away, and Everton will have Leicester at home, Liverpool at home. If it goes into 25, Liverpool will have Wolves at home, Everton away, and Everton will have Palace away, Liverpool at home. Either way, I'm definitely going to want at least 2 Liverpool players. I'll probably want 3, even if that means going double defensive. For Everton, if it goes into 24 with that Leicester fixture, I'd be tempted to probably pick up 1 or 2 Everton players. We now know that David Moyes is back in charge of Everton as well. That news has been confirmed before I started recording this video. If the double goes in 25, I think it's better for those of you with triple captain, because the double is better for Liverpool, but it's worse for Everton players because you get Palace away and Liverpool at home. So I'd be a lot less keen on picking up Everton players. So we'll have to see how things go. Maybe they'll be brilliant under David Moyes. And if it does go into 25, you've still got that Leicester game in 24. But I think Liverpool are obviously the key team that we're going to be looking at. Just a couple of notes. If I had my triple captain left, this is the week that I would be using it. Whichever week the Liverpool-Everton game goes into, that's where I would use my triple captain, because I think bench boost will be more useful later on because we'll have bigger double game weeks, so more teams doubling. And I think assistant manager, unless you're desperate to play it on a slot, you'll have opportunities later on to use that as well. And because Liverpool are top of the league, you're not getting table bonus by using your assistant manager chip on someone like Slot. And I'll cover the assistant manager in more detail later on. And like I said, 3 Liverpool probably non-negotiable for me. 1 to 3 Everton players a possibility. Let's move on to blank game week 29. Now, essentially, whichever 2 teams get to the Carabao Cup final will blank in game week 29, and so will their opponents. So, for example, Newcastle are playing Arsenal in the semi-final of the Carabao Cup. If Newcastle get to the final, they will blank, and so will their game week 29 opponents, which are Crystal Palace. Now, Johnny on Blue Sky, who you can follow, I'll leave a link in the description below, put this great graphic together showing the likelihood of which teams will blank based on the bookies' odds. So Newcastle have got a 2-0 lead against Arsenal, and they're playing at home in the second leg. They are very likely to go through. Less so with Spurs. They do have a 1-0 lead, but they got to go away to Anfield. So Liverpool are still slightly favourites to get through to the final. So there's a 49% chance that Newcastle, Crystal Palace, Aston Villa and Liverpool will blank in 29. And then there's a 36% chance that instead of Villa and Liverpool, it's Spurs and Fulham. At this stage, it's quite unlikely that Arsenal and Chelsea will blank because it will involve Arsenal overturning a 2-0 deficit away to Newcastle. So that's currently how things stand. Just some notes on this. The results for the second leg, i.e. who is in the final, won't be confirmed until after game week 24 and before game week 25. So we've still got a few weeks to go until we get a definite confirmation about who's blanking. I would just keep different possibilities in mind. If you're absolutely sure you do not want a free hit in a blank game week based on what happened last season where it went terribly wrong for a lot of us, then you don't want to get too many players in with a possibility of blanking, especially Newcastle and Crystal Palace players, because of that lead that Newcastle have. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean you can't bring them in. You just have to be aware of what might happen if that game is off. So I've already got Eze, Munoz and Isak. If I add in a third Crystal Palace player and 2 more Newcastle, suddenly I could have 6 players blanking in 29. And I've got Solanke playing for Spurs. I've got Salah and Trent playing for Liverpool. That might force me into a free hit. So just be aware of what could happen later on. The game week 29 blank fixtures should move to game week 33, which would then create the double game week. The 2 main strategies people are going to play is dead end game week 29. If you've not heard that term before for FPL, it basically means concentrate all your transfers up until a particular game week, in this case 29. Don't worry about anything in the future because you're going to use your wildcard. So if you dead end 29, you're only thinking about transfers from 21 to 29 only, and you're going to wildcard in game week 30. The other main strategy will just be to free hit in 29. So don't worry about who's blanking. Keep putting in Palace, Newcastle, Liverpool players, etc. And if they do all end up not having a fixture in game week 29, it doesn't matter because you're going to free hit. I did have a bit of an asterisk by the game week 33 double. If Spurs get to the Carabao Cup final, there is potential for them to have double game week 25 instead of 33. The reason for that is they're still in the Europa League as well, and they're still in the FA Cup, at least at the time of recording. They may well lose in the third round, but I doubt it. If they were to get to the final of all those competitions, there'd be a lot of fixture pile-up later on in the season. So the Premier League might be proactive and bring that fixture forward. At the moment, I would say that's quite unlikely, mostly because everyone expects Liverpool to get through to the final, but it is a possibility. But basically, all the 29 blanks should move to 33. It's not a guarantee, but that's the most likely outcome. It's possible Spurs could get a double in 25, but right now I would not put too much thought into that whatsoever because it's very unlikely to happen. So I just want to very briefly show you what double game week 33 could look like if all the blank games from game week 29 move to game week 33, which isn't a guarantee, it's just the most likely thing to happen. So basically you take one combination from the left side and one combination from the right side. So if Newcastle were to get through to the final of the Carabao Cup, they would double in 33 against Villa away and Palace at home, and Palace would double against Bournemouth at home and Newcastle away. And then if Liverpool end up beating Spurs and getting through to the final, they would double against Leicester away and Villa away, and Villa would double against Newcastle at home and Liverpool at home. If Spurs end up getting through to the final instead of Liverpool, then Liverpool and Villa will just have a single game week, and then you take the combination from the bottom right instead. So Spurs would have Forest at home, Fulham away, Fulham would have Chelsea at home, Spurs at home. At this point, I really wouldn't put too much thought into what could happen in double game week 33 until we get closer to the time. The only thing to be aware of really right now is there should be more teams doubling in 33 than there will be in 24 or 25, wherever that Liverpool-Everton game goes, which means you've got more choices for your assistant manager chip if you want to play it in 33. And if you potentially want to use a bench boost, there's more teams that are going to be doubling as well. So as well as blank game week 29, there's also going to be a blank game week in game week 34, which is essentially for whichever teams get to the FA Cup semi-final, plus their opponents from game week 34. Game week 34 is still a little way off yet. We don't need to panic about it right now. The key thing to note is that the blank in 34 is likely to be bigger than the blank in 29. So if you're considering covering game week 29 with your free hit, that may well be more useful in game week 34 instead. In game week 29, we know it's going to be a maximum of 4 teams that don't have a fixture. In game week 34, the maximum possibility would be 8 teams. That's not necessarily what's likely to happen, but that is the absolute maximum. So if we have a quick look at game week 34, if, for example, Liverpool, Spurs, Man City and Villa were the 4 teams to get to the semi-final, there'd only be 4 teams blanking and 2 fixtures off because they're all playing against each other. But if, for example, Arsenal, Bournemouth, Brighton and Chelsea were the FA Cup semi-finalists, they would all blank, and so would their opponents, Palace, Man United, West Ham, Everton. I don't want to get into this too much right now because we're still halfway through the FA Cup third round at the time of recording, and all this is based off the semi-final. There's still a long way to go, but essentially you could have more teams blanking in game week 34 compared to 29. The postponed fixtures from blank game week 34 will likely go into game week 36, creating a double game week. That will then probably be the biggest double game week of the season. Very handy for things like bench boost, and obviously more opportunities, or at least more options to potentially use your assistant manager chip if you want to save it until then. I'm not going to go into what double game week 36 could look like because we need way more information from, as we get through more rounds of the FA Cup. We should know who's blanking in 34 before the game week 30 deadline, which is why game week 30 is quite a handy week to look to wildcard in. At that point, the whole season schedule for blanks and doubles should be known, or at the very least can be worked out. So if, for example, by game week 30 deadline, we know who's doubling in 33 and who's blanking in 34, we'll know where the rest of the double game weeks are going to be put. We will know the quarter-final draw for the FA Cup before game week 28, which won't tell us who's going to blank in 34, but by odds we can have a good guess at who it might be. So if, for example, Liverpool are in the quarter-final and there's somehow been a League 2 team that's got to the quarter-final, that's who Liverpool are playing, it's very likely they will then get to the semi-final, so they will be blanking and so will their opponent. So we'll have a bit more information by the time we get to game week 28, but the information in terms of who's definitely blanking will be before game week 30. So let's move on to the chips and when you might want to use them, starting with the wildcard and free hit. Now, one thing to note, if different teams get to the Carabao Cup final and the FA Cup semi-finals, we will have at least some different teams doubling in 33 and 36. And the wildcard and free hit are very useful to manage those situations. So if you remember earlier, I said that Newcastle are odds-on favourites to get through to the final. If that, of the Carabao Cup that is, if that happens, that means Arsenal won't blank in 29, but it also means they won't double in 33. So it's not to say you won't have any Arsenal players, but they might be a little bit less needed compared to teams that are doubling in game week 33. If we take a look at game week 34, let's say that Arsenal do get knocked out in the semi-final stage of the Carabao Cup, but they get through to the semi-final of the FA Cup, they would then blank in 34, and then they would double in 36. So Arsenal might play in 29 single game week, play in 33 single game week, blank in 34, and then double in 36. So we might have a situation where you might not want Arsenal players earlier on in the final stretch, but you do want them later. And that is why free hitting in a blank could be quite useful. And I'll come on to that in a second. By the way, if Arsenal do get to the semi-final, then Palace is their opponent in game week 34, so they would also blank. So potentially, you could have a situation where Palace are blanking in 29 because Newcastle are through to the through to the final of the Carabao Cup. They're doubling in 33 because their Newcastle fixture has to go somewhere. They're blanking in 34 because Arsenal have got through to the semi-finals of the FA Cup. And then they're doubling in 36 because that fixture has to go somewhere. So it might be that you want Crystal Palace players for the double, but you don't want them in the blanks. That's why I mentioned earlier that dead end game week 29 or free hit 29 could be quite useful. But again, we'll come on to that in more detail in a second. Popular strategies for just these chips, we'll talk about Assistant Manager in a minute, is going to be dead end game week 29. So again, that just means you focus all your transfers up to that week. You don't worry about what's coming up afterwards. You wildcard in game week 30, hopefully with the knowledge of what the rest of the season schedule looks like, and you free hit in 34 to cover the blanks. And the idea would be that on wildcard 30, you get in the double game week players that you're going to need for 33 and 36 in advance, or at least you get most of them in, and then get the rest in later on transfers. I know that people are going to be really against using the free hit in a blank because of what happened last season. But the way the season is set up this year is a little bit different. I think it's going to be way more useful. And what you've got to remember is, yes, a free hit and a double will score you more points in that specific game week versus using it in a blank. But your overall points is what matters. So if you can get in all your double game week players on your wild card and you just free hit in the blank to cover that, most of the time that can work, even though it didn't work last year. And by the way, you don't have to do these strategies. I'm just telling you these will be the most popular based on how the rest of the season looks like. The other strategy would be, instead of dead ending into 29, you free hit in 29 and you dead end into game week 34 instead. Because when you free hit in 29 to cover the blank, the players in your team that you're trying to cover, like Newcastle Palace players, for example, will then double in 33, and then you can just dead end into 34 and not worry about it, and then you wildcard out of it in game week 35. It might be that a different chip strategy ends up being better, and we'll obviously talk about this more as we get more information from all the cup competitions, but as things stand, with free hit and wildcard, they will probably be the two most popular strategies that the community talks about. None of this, though, really needs to be thought about too much until game week 25. The reason game week 25, that's when we'll know who's in the Carabao Cup final. So let's talk about the assistant manager chip next. Now, the prices for the managers were revealed on Friday, and I did a whole separate video about that, so I don't want to go into that again. I want to concentrate more on when people might want to actually play the chip. But because it's quite new and none of us have played it yet, there still seems to be quite a bit of confusion. So before I get onto the game weeks you're going to want to play it, let's go through a quick FAQ. So the prices for the managers range between 0.5 and 1.5 million. So when you activate the chip, you're going to need that much money in your bank to be able to afford one of the 20 managers. And you'll get that money back when the chip isn't active anymore. Presumably, it will just go back into your bank, and then you'll have to spend transfers to get that into your standard 15-man squad. The chip is active for 3 game weeks, and while it's active, you can't play another chip. So let's say the Liverpool and Everton double game week goes into game week 24. You decide to use it on David Moyes in game week 24 itself. That will then be active for 24, 25, and 26. You can't play any other chips during that time, right? You can transfer to another manager each game week if you want. It will cost a normal transfer. So when you first activate the chip, it will cost you a bit of money, but it doesn't use one of your transfers. But to move manager, that will use a transfer. So if you activate it on David Moyes in game week 24, and you want to move to a different manager in 25, you'll need to make sure you've got the money if that manager is more expensive, and that will cost you a transfer, just like it would for a player. Manager prices don't change, so what they've been revealed at will be what they stay for the rest of the season. The table position bonus, which we'll talk about in a second, is based on when the game week starts. So let's say, for example, you could use the assistant manager chip in game week 21, which you can't, by the way. It's not available until game week 24. But let's just say you could use it in 21. The table bonus will be based on what the Premier League table looks like right now. It's always at the start of the game week. And then when the matches have been played in 21, the table bonus will be based on how it looks before game week 22, etc. Managers being sacked, suspended, being ill and missing games, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Right, essentially, assistant manager is a fancy word or a fancy phrase for this chip. You're just picking a team, right? You're paying 0.5 to 1.5 million on a team rather than a manager. If you go for Amorim and he gets sacked, you just get whoever's in charge of Man United, essentially. For a win, you get 6 points. So if you go for Liverpool, they win the game, you get 6 points. If it's a draw, it's 3 points. If it's for a goal, you get 1 point per goal, and for a clean sheet, it's 2 points. The table bonus is if you pick a manager who's playing against a team 5 positions or higher. In that case, you get 16 points for a win and 8 points for a draw. So you get the standard 6 points for the win plus a 10 bonus. And for the draw, you get the standard 3 plus a 5 bonus. So I think it's going to be well worth looking to go for a manager that's 5 positions below who they're playing. Because even if they get a draw, that is worth more than a standard win. So Liverpool at the top, if they beat anyone, you get 6 points. If you go for Crystal Palace against Forest and they just get a draw, that's 8 points. So it's definitely going to be worth looking at that. And just quickly to go back in case I missed it, the chip's active for 3 game weeks. It works like all other chips. If a team's got 2 matches because of a double, you get the manager for both of those games. So that's the FAQ. I don't think there's anything else I've missed, but if there is, let me know down in the comments below. I'll try and cover it in a different video. In terms of when you're going to want to use it, it's likely to be over a double game week because you're going to want that extra fixture. So double game week 24 to 26, if the Liverpool-Everton double goes into 24. If it goes into 25, then 25 to 27 is an option. Or you could activate it in 31 to catch the double in 33. And obviously you can go for any combination, right? You could do 32 to 34 to cover the double in 33, but 34 is a blank, so it's probably not a great idea. Or, to get that double at the end in game week 36, you could activate it that week and then take that up until game week 38. So that's probably when most people are going to do it. 36 to 38, 31 to 33, or possibly for Everton or Liverpool in the double that's a little bit closer. It's difficult to pre-plan because the table positions change, right? If I tell you right now that Crystal Palace are 5 places below Nottingham Forest, but by the time we get to that fixture in game week 36, 37, whenever it is, they're much closer. You might not get that bonus. So you've got to try and keep your options open as much as possible. But obviously there will be other teams that have gone down. So you might bet on them instead. The end of season in particular could bring interesting possibilities due to teams in the cup competitions and rotation. So I think I mentioned on the manager prices video yesterday, game week 37, Brighton at home to Liverpool. You probably wouldn't bet on Brighton to win that game, generally. But Liverpool might have won the league by then. They might still be in the Champions League. They might rotate heavily. Even if you get a draw, that's worth 8 points for Brighton if they're 5 places below Liverpool. And if they do snatch a win because Liverpool just don't care, they've been out celebrating for weeks, that's worth huge points. So that's the kind of thing I like about end of the season. That's why I'm tempted to use it then as well. You also might have better team value. So remembering that it costs money to have a manager, the more team value you've got, the easier it is to have that manager and also have a really good team. That shouldn't be the reason you save it until later. It's just one of the benefits. On the other hand, if you use your assistant manager early, let's say you use it on slot for the double in 24 or 25, later on when you wildcard, let's say game week 30, you can focus all your team value on your squad. You don't have to worry about transfers and other money for the managers. So there's kind of pros and cons to both. I really like the idea of trying to target the table bonus because it could be worth huge points. You get that right in a double game week, you're looking at 30 plus points just for that 1 week. And that's the dream, right? It might be terrible. You might lose both of those games. I think it's worth going for. And you're likely to want to use transfers on managers, I think, just because of how many points it's worth. And also, because it doesn't matter what happens to the manager, you're basically picking a team. There's no worries about injuries and stuff like that. Like I've triple captained players before. They go off injured in the first half of the first game. Absolute nightmare. With assistant manager, it doesn't matter. Obviously, you don't want players to get injured because that means the team's less likely to win. But in terms of it affecting your chip massively, not quite so much. So the bench boost is pretty simple. If you've got it left and you want to use it in a double, it's almost certainly going to be double game week 33 or double game week 36. I've written here that whichever week you don't use the assistant manager essentially, but some of you might want to use it on like Arna slot in the double in 24 or 25, which is absolutely fine. It's your team. You should do whatever you feel is best. But if you end up saving the assistant manager for the final stretch of the season, whichever week you end up using that in, you'll just use the bench boost in the opposite one. Now, for the bench boost in isolation, double game week 36 will be the bigger double. So you'll have more teams with extra fixtures. So it's easier to get a double game week bench boost out of that. But it might be that the assistant manager lines up better for that week. And also, bench boost in 33 might be easier depending on who gets to the Carabao Cup final. So if Newcastle get to the final, which looks quite likely, they and Palace will blank in 29 and double in 33. They've got cheaper players than, say, Liverpool, for example. So it might actually be easier to bench boost in 33 because you can just put cheap players on your bench. Happy days. Again, it's like the theme of this video. None of this has to be decided right now. So you can just wait and see. If you want to use your bench boost on a single game week before any of this happens, because you'd prefer just to concentrate on everything else for the final stretch of the season, absolutely fine. There's not a specific week that I know of right now that's particularly good. It's going to be very team dependent. I'm not against that. But if you don't have a great week, I just wouldn't force it. You'll almost certainly have a decent bench at some point after you've wildcarded, and you'll know the fixture schedule later on to try and work towards that as well. So let's end with a quick summary. This is what the fixture schedule is likely to look like for the rest of the season as it stands. So a double game week in 24 or 25, wherever Everton versus Liverpool ends up being rearranged. A blank game week in 29, a double game week in 33, a slightly bigger blank game week in 34, and a slightly bigger double game week in 36. It might be that other games get postponed because of weather or whatever it might be, and if that happens, we'll have another mini blank game week. That game will have to be rearranged somewhere else. But as it stands, that's going to be the main fixture schedule for the rest of the season. Popular chip strategies, dead end 29, wildcard 30, free hit 34, or free hit 29, dead end 34, wildcard 35. I think that is what most people are going to do. You might have different views on that. You might have a different chip setup, i.e. you've used more chips than I have, etc. That's fine. You can do whatever you like with your own team. That's just going to be the most popular ways to cover the rest of that fixture schedule, depending on, you know, where the blanks and doubles or which teams end up blanking and doubling. Triple captain, I would probably use it in 24 or 25, basically where that Everton-Liverpool game goes, and just put it on Mo Salah. That seems pretty easy. Bench boost in 33 or 36, and then assistant manager over whichever double you don't triple captain or bench boost. So if you triple captain in 24, 25, bench boost in 36, you're using your assistant manager over Double Game Week 33, which would probably be active between 31 and 33 for those 3 game weeks. Subscribe if you found that useful and want to stay up to date. I'll try and cover this as we get more info throughout the season. I would definitely follow the fixture gurus on Twitter, who most of the time have all this info way ahead of everyone else. They're very clued in with how this stuff works. So Ben Krellin on Twitter, at Ben Krellin, James from Planet FPL, at Planet FPL Pod. They will also do a chip strategy podcast on Monday. Make sure to check that out. They're on YouTube and audio formats. Tala _Nadeem_90 on Twitter. Follow those 3 people. Very helpful in general, but especially around chips, doubles, and blanks. And just to end, don't panic just yet. There's still 8 game weeks to go before that first blank. We've got a small double game week to come before that. There's plenty more information to come. You don't have to decide on very much right now. So just try to enjoy it. Hopefully you found that useful. Give it a like, hit subscribe, rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast, and I'll catch you again tomorrow for my team selection for Game Week 21.